Bill Browder is the businessman who once decided to become a capitalist just because his parents were communists and his grandfather once was the leader of the American Communist Party. Browder started to invest in Russia. Today he lives under constant threat from the Russian security service. Now he has published this book about one of the greatest business scandals ever. Bill, very welcome to our Studio 12 interview.
Thank you.
I would like to start with asking you, Bill, you started Hermitage Capital in the mid-90s and soon you became very prosperous. You actually became the largest foreign investor in Russia. What was your business idea?
Well, so I went out after the fall of the Soviet Union, and when they went from communism to capitalism, they came up with this idea, which was to make everybody a capitalist, and they gave away shares for free to everybody. And so those shares started trading in the stock market at a 99% or greater discount to shares of similar companies in the West. And so I did the analysis and I said, if you're buying at a 99% discount, things don't have to get good, they just have to get a little bit less bad, and you make a lot of money. And so I set up an investment fund called the Hermitage Fund, where I took Western capital into Russia, bought shares at a 99% discount, and then waited for things to go from horrible to bad. And they did. And we made multiples of our money. And so for a while, it was a wonderful situation.
And you became a very wealthy man.
I became wealthy, and my clients became wealthier, and it was a win-win situation all around.
But in 2005, you returned from a trip to Britain, and suddenly you weren't allowed back into Russia. Your visa was annulled, and you were escorted out of the country. What had happened?
Well, so after I became the biggest investor in Russia, I had $4.5 billion invested in the country. I started to discover corruption, big corruption in the companies I was investing in. And I realized that I couldn't actually be a responsible fund manager unless I did something to fight the corruption. And so I started to research who was doing the stealing, how they were doing the stealing, and then sharing it with the international media, with the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, etc. I put all this stuff out there. And for a while, these exposés were very successful. They pushed the share prices up. The bad guys stole less money. And I felt like I was doing a great service for the Russian country, sort of almost like a private sector police force when the public sector wasn't doing its job. That worked for a while. And then on November 13th, 2005, I was flying back into the country from London. I was stopped at the VIP lounge of Sheremetyevo 2. I was escorted by 4 officers down to the detention center of the airport, kept for 15 hours there, put on a plane back to London, deported, and then ultimately declared a threat to national security.
But why?
Because I had exposed corruption, and the corruption came close to the top or touched the top.
Vladimir Putin.
Vladimir Putin.
But you still kept your business going until 2007.
So, well, I did and I didn't. So one of the things which was clear to me was that when they kick you out of Russia, they tend to, that's just the first of many bad things that they're going to do. And I said, what else bad can they do? The first thing is they can seize all of my assets, and the second is they can arrest all of my people. And so I evacuated my staff, I got everybody out as quickly as I could, and then we quickly and quietly sold every last security that we held inside of Russia out of the country, so that if they couldn't get my people and couldn't get my assets, then everything was safe. And I thought that was...
You thought?
I thought it was safe. I thought that was the end of the story. It turned out to not be. It turned out to be the beginning of the worst nightmare you could ever imagine.
And what happened in 2007? They raided your office.
So I've moved on to other businesses now. I'm investing money in other parts of the world. And in 2007, in June of 2007, I get a call from my secretary. I had one secretary left in my Moscow office, and she calls me and says, there's 25 police officers here raiding the office. I then get a call from my lawyer. He says, there's 25 more officers raiding our office. And it turned out that all these officers were turning all the offices that I had anything to do with upside down, looking for the stamps, seals, and certificates for the investment holding companies, the empty investment holding companies that they didn't know were empty, that we had invested all of our money through. They found those documents at our law firm, and then all sorts of terrible problems emerged after that.
Like?
Well, what happened first was that our investment holding companies, the companies these were shell companies at this point, had been fraudulently re-registered using the documents seized by the police out of our name into the name of a man who had been convicted of murder and let out of jail early by the Interior Ministry, presumably to put his name on these documents. At this point, we hired a young lawyer, a man named Sergej Magnitsky. He was 35 years old. He worked for an American law firm, and he was the smartest lawyer I knew in Russia, to investigate. He investigates, and it takes him about 6 months to investigate, and he discovers a number of things. First, he discovered that they tried to seize all of our assets by going to all of our banks. There were no assets there, thank God. The second thing he discovered, and this is truly the most cynical thing you could ever imagine, is that these officers, these police officers, who had possession through their colleagues of our stolen investment companies, went to the tax authorities, the Russian tax authorities, and they went to them and applied for a $230 million fraudulent tax refund. We paid $230 million the previous year of taxes. They go back with these empty companies and say, we want that tax money back. They applied for it on the 23rd of December, 2007, 2 days before Christmas, and it was awarded the next day. The largest tax refund in the history of Russia, awarded in one day, no questions asked.
$230 million. I mean, to me, it would be quite easy to say that this sounds to me like a conspiracy theory.
A conspiracy theory, for sure. There's no way that you couldn't do this without without high-level government officials conspiring with all these people. So this is not something that...
It's not a theory, it's fact.
It's a conspiracy reality, not a conspiracy theory. So you have... So if you're just a regular guy and you apply for a $5,000 tax refund, it'll take you 10 years and you'll spend $20,000 trying to get your money back. So to have a $230 million tax refund, the largest in history, awarded in one day with no questions asked, it's clear this goes right up the chain.
And what happened to your lawyer, Magnitsky?
Well, so we figured that even if it goes up the chain, this couldn't be in Putin's interest. Why would Putin allow somebody to steal all this money? So we said if we just expose it properly, then Putin will crush the bad guys because he's a nationalist, right? Isn't this what nationalists should be doing? So we publicize it, we file criminal complaints, and then Sergei testifies against the people involved. And instead of having good guys getting bad guys, it turned out that there were no good guys, that Putin wasn't a real nationalist, he was a crook. Because instead of going after the bad guys, they went after Sergei Magnitsky. They went to his home on November 24th, 2008. They arrested him, they put him in pretrial detention, and then they began to torture him to withdraw his testimony. They put him in cells with 14 inmates and 8 beds and left the lights on 24 hours a day to impose sleep deprivation. They put him in cells with no heat and no window panes in December in Moscow, so he nearly froze to death. They put him in cells with no toilet, just a hole in the floor where the sewage would bubble up. And after about 6 months of this, he got sick. He got terrible pains in his stomach. He was diagnosed as having pancreatitis and gallstones. He lost 20 kilos. And he was due to have an operation for his sickness on the 1st of August, 2009. But they kept on coming to him throughout this whole time and said, if you sign a false confession saying you stole the $230 million, then your conditions will improve.
And did he sign?
No. This is what's so interesting, is that Sergei was a man of just unbelievable principles. He was just absolutely not going to perjure himself in order to improve his physical condition. And they also asked him to testify against me in instructing him to steal this $230 million. And Sergei was not going to bear false witness against me. And so I don't think anyone knows how they would behave in a situation like this. I don't think Sergei would have known. But when he was put under physical torture, he refused to compromise and bear false witness and perjure himself. And so as a result of him not doing that, they abruptly moved him a week before the operation from a prison that had a medical center to a prison called Butyrka, which is a maximum security prison, one of the toughest prisons in Russia, and most significantly for Sergei, a place where there was no medical wing, no place where he could be treated for his pancreatitis and gallstones. And at Butyrka, everything broke down completely. He went into a downward spiral. He went into constant, agonizing, ear-piercing physical pain, and they refused him all medical attention, no pain relief, no nothing. And things got worse and worse and worse. Sergei and his lawyers desperately applied in writing for medical attention to every different branch of the Russian penal system, judicial system, law enforcement system, everything, begging for medical attention. They refused him at every step of the way. On November 16, 2009, Sergei went into critical condition. On that night, the prison authorities at Butyrka then sent him to a prison that had a medical facility by ambulance. But when he arrived at this new prison, Instead of putting him in the emergency room, they put him in an isolation cell, they chained him to a bed, and 8 riot guards with rubber batons beat him until he died. November 16th, 2009. He was 37 years old. He left a wife and 2 children. And it's just the most heartbreaking thing that could ever have happened.
We were able to attend his funeral.
I couldn't go to his funeral because I was also put under, an arrest warrant was put out for me to arrest me as his co-conspirator in this trumped-up criminal case, and so I would have been arrested and tortured and killed in a Russian prison as well.
What has happened to his family?
Well, his family has been eventually has moved from Russia to London to be out of harm's way, but obviously that doesn't take away from the terrible heartbreak and suffering that they've had to go through. And there's a whole other chapter of the suffering, which is the cover-up that happens afterwards.
And since then, you've actually been more or less at war with Russian authorities and President Putin himself.
Well, basically, I made it so on the 17th of November, the morning after Sergei died, I got the call at 7:45 in the morning, and the call was just so terrible. It was like a knife going right into my chest. And after I stopped hyperventilating, and the shock of it sort of went away, I said to myself, I have to do something about this. And I made a vow to Sergei's memory, to his family, and to myself that I was going to get justice for Sergej Magnitsky. And I've been pursuing justice ever since. And by pursuing justice for a murder of a patriot, a guy who was trying to help his country, I've become Putin's #1 foreign enemy.
But you actually approached the US Congress, and there's a new law called the Magnitsky Act. What does that say?
Well, so my first attempt was to get justice inside of Russia before I approached US Congress. Sergei had written everything down. He had written down everything that happened to him in the form of 450 complaints in his 358 days in detention. He wrote it all down: who, what, where, why, when. And so we had the most detailed human rights abuse cases come out of Russia in the last 35 years. And so we thought they would give him justice inside of Russia, but they refused. They exonerated everybody involved. They covered up everything about his death, and they promoted some of the most complicit people. So I said, if no justice is possible inside of Russia, let's try to get justice outside of Russia. And I went to the US Congress, and I said, the people who did this, they did it for money. They did it for $230 million. They killed Sergej Magnitsky for $230 million. And those people don't like to keep their money in Russia because as easily as they stole it, it could be stolen from them. They like to keep it in the West. They like to keep it in New York, in London, in French Riviera, Switzerland, Sweden. They like to keep their money outside of Russia. And so I said, let's see if we can stop them from traveling outside of Russia and have their assets frozen outside of Russia. And this concept of visa sanctions and asset freezes became known as the Magnitsky Act, named after Sergej Magnitsky. I spent 3.5 years going to Washington to lobby for this to be passed. And in December 2012, it was passed 92-4 in the US Senate, 89% of the House of Representatives, and President Obama signed it into law on December 14th, 2012. It's the first sanctions act against Russia in the last 35 years, and it became the template for further sanctions on Ukraine and other things.
I mean, you spent a lot of time on this, and how's your and your family's situation today? I mean, are you under threat?
I am under threat. I've been personally threatened.
What kind of threats? Death
threats, kidnapping threats, extradition threats, Interpol red notices, lawsuits, everything. They make television shows about me, making up all sorts of crazy stuff, calling me a murderer in Russia. I'm considered to be the foreign enemy #1 in Russia because of putting this whole case out into the open for everybody to see.
You must be a courageous man.
I don't think I'm courageous. I'm just very upset. I'm full of grief, full of responsibility for what happened to Sergej Magnitsky, and full of indignation that these people can be such evil people to think that they can get away with it.
But looking back, I mean, you must have spent a fortune on this. Have you ever felt that you've doubted this project?
Well, you know, I've never looked at. I sort of live one day at a time. I don't look at what the end goal is. I just look at what am I doing today to further justice for Sergej Magnitsky. I don't say, am I, is it ever going to happen? I just looked day in, one day to the next day to the next day. And if I didn't, I wouldn't be able to live with myself. The poison of inaction for not getting justice for Sergei would eat me up from the inside.
But you've obviously paid a very high price for this. Is it possible today to invest in Russia and still stay clean?
Absolutely not. There's only two options in Russia. If you go to Russia, they'll come to you. They'll be the knock on your door, and they'll say, we want half your business, 3/4 of your business, 30% of your business. And the people who are asking are the mafia. So you basically have to become business partners with the mafia. In many countries, where I come from, I live in the UK or the US, where I originated from, that would be a crime. You'd be violating the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act or the UK Bribery Act if you did that. So if you want to survive in Russia, you have to commit a crime in the West. If you want to not commit a crime in the West, if you want to do what I did, which is to challenge the corruption, then you've committed an informal crime in Russia, which is the crime of not letting the criminals become your business partners. And in that case, that your assets will be seized through illegal means. You'll have a situation like Sergej Magnitsky or some other horrific situation. And so that's just not business. That is not what businessmen sign up for. And so nobody should do that. And anyone who does, having read this book, is being negligent and irresponsible.
It's a terrible story, but thank you very much for coming here, Bill.
Thank you.
Well, I must say...